Yo, this is Bench Gamer here. This is going to be my first review of Honkai Star Rail. I do say first review because I foresee this game being something I play for a long time on a long-term basis, just like Genshin Impact. And I've been playing Genshin Impact since maybe 1.1 or 1.2. I don't think I've missed more than a week of daily logins in total since then. So I've been playing that game for almost 2.5, maybe even a bit more years now. And this is going to be the same thing. So at appropriate junctures, maybe when a new region is finished, I will give my thoughts and feelings and my analysis of where this game is headed, probably at those times. Right now, I have finished the first major region of Honkai Star Rail, Belobog. I haven't done all of the side quests yet, but I have pretty much 99% of the chests. I have finished the last major story quests, and currently I'm at Trailblaze level 33, which is essentially the same thing as adventure rank in Genshin Impact, equilibrium level, which is the same thing as world level in Genshin Impact. There's this support character now. I won't talk too much about it, but essentially you can just set a character that you have as something that, as a support character that other players can use, and if they use them, then you can collect this support reward, which is essentially just Mora. They call them credits here in this game, but that's basically it. It's nothing too much, and this is my character profile. So let's get started with the review. I think I'm going to start by talking about my first day impressions of the game and how that has changed. Some of the positive things I've said have remained true, while others have not. Both positives and negatives. So let's just start with one of the positives that I said about the game that turned out to be not as true as I thought, which is the graphics of the game. Initially, I said that the character models seem to be a bit more detailed than in Genshin Impact. I thought that the character textures seemed to be more on point. There seemed to be less jagged edges, and it just seems to be a bit more, the fidelity of the graphics for the characters in particular seem to be on a higher standard than in Genshin Impact. However, I will have to take that back because I was not aware. I forgot something that is different in this game compared to Genshin, which is that the rendering quality do not have the same settings. So if you look at the rendering quality settings here, right, it goes from 0.6 to 0.8 to 1.0 to 1.2, 1.4, 1.6. Basically, it goes up in increments of 0.2. So I am forced to use rendering quality 1.2, otherwise it would be lower than in Genshin Impact, the setting that I have currently in Genshin Impact, which is 1.1, right? In Genshin Impact, I have the graphic settings set on resolution 1.1 because it does go up by increments of 0.2 from 0.6 to 1.0, but after that it goes up by increments of 0.1. So this has been the setting that I have been playing on Genshin Impact for the last 2.5 years, and that is the setting I'm going to keep on using. I don't want to set it on 1.2. But in Honkai Star Rail, that's impossible. They don't actually have that setting, so I have to use 1.2 or else it's like lower than Genshin Impact. So it's not really the same thing anymore. There's no equivalent setting in Genshin Impact that I can use. I guess I could set it to 1.2 on Genshin to compare it then, but I feel like that's kind of a cop-out because it's literally having to change Genshin Impact to match it to Honkai Star Rail, and I think it should have been the other way around if I were to truly say that Honkai Star Rail is a superior game. There is also the issue of performance. This game does not perform as well as I hoped it would. There's nothing game-breaking about it. There's no like major crashes. I don't think I've crashed even once since I started playing this game. This game is a Hoyoverse level game when it comes to support for PC, at least since Genshin Impact released. By which I mean that everything runs as well as it should, right? There are still stutters like in Genshin Impact, unfortunately. There are still frame time and frame rate issues. If you look in the top left, my FPS constantly dips below 60, and the frame time goes from like 6.6 to like 16.9 to 17.0. It's all over the place. My PC is a 2070 Super. I have a one i7 700. I forgot what it is, like 9700K. Basically, it's supposed to be able to run this game, and it's supposed to be able to run Genshin Impact as well. But for whatever reason, maybe it's the engine, maybe it's not. I actually have no idea what it is because I am not a programmer. I am not a tech enthusiast. What I know is that both games have constant stutters. Both games have frame rate issues at certain points in the game, especially when you go into like Sumeru in Genshin Impact. That feels like what it's like in Honkai Star Rail all the time. Even when you press S, when you go into the main menu, you can notice there's micro stutter right here. So essentially what I'm saying that even though this game looks very good, even though it does have more instanced areas, in fact, all of the areas are instanced, this game does not perform appreciably better. I think it actually just reallocates the requirements for your computer or whatever device you're using to the GPU instead. I'm currently running Genshin Impact and Honkai Star Rail at the same time, so it's not a good comparison. But if you look in the top left, I have my metrics on for the temperatures at all times. My GPU usually hangs around the high 30s to the mid 40s when I'm playing Genshin Impact. For Honkai Star Rail, however, it's usually at around the high 40s. For whatever reason, probably because I'm in the train right now, which is the main hub of this game, it's sitting around below 50 Celsius for my GPU, whereas my CPU is around 55 to 60 Celsius, which is pretty normal for Genshin Impact. So right now it's performing pretty well, but there was this one time at the end of Belobog's story when I went into this other world and there were a bunch of rocks floating all over the place. Basically, there's a lot of graphical assets and 3D models that I had to render, and my GPU actually went up to 70 Celsius. And that has never happened before in Genshin Impact, even in the most detailed areas, like Sumeru. Even when you go to like Sumeru City, right? You go into the teleport point for Sumeru City, you go over there. Even here, it doesn't really do anything. Okay, this is the wrong place, whatever. I have to go over here. Even when you go to the main city hub, the GPU does not go as high as 70 Celsius. Genshin Impact and Honkai Star Rail are both, relatively speaking, very low resource intensive games. And that is still true, but unfortunately, no matter how good my PC is or what device I played on, whether it's on my Android phone, I think it's, I don't actually know, I think it's the P30 Pro, I actually forgot what model my phone is, or on my laptop, on lowest settings, it still has stutters. So basically that's all I'm saying. The graphics is unfortunately not as improved. The graphics and performance are not as improved as I hoped it would be. So let's go over to, I'm going to talk about something else about the graphics now. Let's go to the main hub for Belobog, right? This is something I very much like about Honkai Star Rail, which is that when you go into the main hub, even though this is essentially an instanced area, you go into the map, you look at what you are exploring. This is not an open world area. However, when you look at the scope of the structures, when you look at what is going on around you with all these people walking by, when you look at the number of NPCs that you can interact with, the number of places that you can enter, here there is something you can buy, there's a book merchant over here, there's a flower shop over here, there's somebody playing music over here on their guitar. Wow. When you look at the graphics of the game and how it's stylized, this does not give me the feeling of a very small game. They have done a very good job of making a limited area, an instanced area, look bigger than it is. And this is a graphics code style that has made the game, has taken the game farther than if it was made by an inferior developer, essentially. The graphics of the game and the style of the game are very on point. I love the European-esque setting here. I'm not sure how I'm going to feel about the future regions, but yeah, it's a Hoyoverse game. However, when you do go into the combat regions, it's essentially an on-corridor turn-based game. If you've played Final Fantasy, then you know what's going on. So that was one of the main things I talked about in my first day impressions of Honkai Star Rail, which is that the graphics are very good. That remains true. It's just not as good as it could have been in terms of performance. Another thing I talked about, which was a negative, was that the character selection screen is very bad. It's not a deal breaker by any means. It just feels like a really missed opportunity considering how different and how much more character there is for the character selection screen in Genshin Impact. I talked a bit about this in my first day impressions video. So if you look at the Genshin Impact character selection screen, the background is yellow because this character is a Geo character. The background for this character is blue because this is a Hydro character. And you'll also notice that has special effects, right? This character's background has these bubbles going up in the air. This is because it is essentially a water character. The same for this character. This character is a Nemo character who uses wind techniques. So they have wind gusts blowing around them. This is a Geo character again, yellow background, although I don't notice any other special effects. There is also an Electro character here who uses electricity, and you can see electric tendrils around them as well as a purple background. In Honkai Star Rail, as I said in my first impressions video, all of the characters have the same background, even if they are like part of the abundance path, or the harmony path, or the erudition path, or they're using fire, or they're using electricity. It's all the same background. This is, again, not a major detractor, but it is something that I've noticed, and it kind of spans throughout the entire game, as I've noticed after I started playing it more and more after the first day, which is that the characters have less space to express themselves. They may have more. It could probably be subjectively said that they have more voices in the main story, but even then, I'm not sure how you would quantify that unless you literally count every single line they say in the main story. So what I mean is, each character has one Idleman animation and only one Idleman animation, and they do not play in the character selection screen, which is what I found so weird when you compare it to Genshin Impact. I said this again in my first day impressions, but you select a character in Genshin Impact, right? And they will immediately play their idle animation, which for John Lee is this rock thing that floats around him. For Scaramouche, he's going to do either like a smirk or something, and then he's going to use his Anemo powers and then create a black hole, and you immediately get a sense of what the character is like. For Ito, I actually don't know what his idle animation. Oh, he uses a brush to brush his hair. Now you have a good idea of what this character is like. And then you go to Honkai Star Rail and you go to your character selection screen, and what do you get? A very boring background and a character that doesn't really do anything. And then you go into the other tabs for this character selection screen, and you don't see any of the character do anything else either. There's no other angle shots of the character. You go to traces, it just shows you icons. You go to light cone, you see a picture of the light cone. You go to relics, you just see the relics. You go to eidolons, and then you get to see them. Eventually you get to see a semi-naked picture of them if you get to the last eidolon. But other than that, well, you just get to see snippets of the same character model in these glass-like frames. With with Genshin Impact, you go to weapons, right? And you see the character holding the weapon. You go to artifacts, you see the character doing this praying animation pose. You go to constellations, you don't get to see the character here. So this is pretty much the same as Honkai Star Rail. You go to talents, and also another unique pose that they have. So Ito does this pose. This is the same pose for Scaramouche, but other characters have different poses for. I think it's not the same for each character model. They basically have a set of poses that they use for different characters. So this character does this pose, a different pose, another pose. This guy has this pose. This girl has this pose. So it just gives them a little bit more character than I feel like is available in this game, and that has remained true since the first day I started playing this game, unfortunately. Now, I thought it would change the more I play this game, and it sort of has, but there are other problems has come up, which is that even though this idle pose does not play in this character selection screen, they do play in civilian areas, essentially, where there are no enemies. So you see Stella just started playing with her phone all of a sudden, and then you can also see the other idle animations for other characters if they are in an idle civilian zone. But unfortunately, for whatever reason, you can't switch characters in the main hub. And this is really weird because this is where you will be going back to for quite a few instances, because you will be seeing this character. Where is he? Pom Pom. He's the character you will be going back to see your Trailblaze level. And I think this place is also where you're supposed to be going anyways, because you can switch the music here, you can do your synthesizer here, although you can also do this in the tab. You can talk to the other characters here, and sometimes there will also be additional characters that you get from your companionship missions, which are essentially the story quests from Genshin Impact. However, there's an added twist here, which is that once you've completed your companionship mission, I think I have one here. Yeah, companion mission. Once you have completed your companion mission for the character that you're doing it for, that character will sometimes show up on your train, which is the spaceship you're on. So sometimes I have Arlen here. I don't know why he's not here now. It seems to be an organic thing. They sometimes show up, sometimes they don't. So far, I only have Arlen, but I suspect that the more companions I recruit, the more they will just start showing up all over the place here. And that has added a greater degree of interactivity that does not exist in Genshin Impact. And I suspect that this feature was actually probably beta tested in Genshin Impact before it came out in Honkai Star Rail. I think this was actually a feature that had first planned for the teapot, but for whatever reason, they didn't get it to work in Genshin, and then they implemented here. The reason why I say that is that from a lore standpoint, it doesn't really make sense for why they're here. For these characters, they are part of the crew. They are on the train all the time. Welt is here, Himeko is here, but I'm not really sure why Arlen is on the train, because from a lore standpoint, when I was in Belobog, when I was in Yarilo 6, our train was stranded here. So unless they have a teleporter for people on Herta space station to go directly onto our train, then I don't see why that character should have been on the train in the first place. And I don't know why I was able to go to Herta space station while I was on Yarilo 6. Of course, this is an abstraction. In Genshin Impact, it's the same thing. There was, at one point, we were trapped on Sumeru. We were trapped in Sumeru City because we were in a Samsara, but realistically, you could just teleport out and do something else. However, I do feel like Genshin Impact provides a greater degree of consistency in terms of lore than in Honkai Star Rail. When I was in Yarilo 6, when I was in Belobog, I would constantly get text messages from people who were not really even from Belobog. So while I was in Belobog doing missions, apparently being trapped underground, I would get text messages from characters from Herta Space Station telling me to do their quest for them, and then I would actually teleport back to Herta Space Station and then do their quest there. It's not a big deal. It just feels like another degree of abstraction that that adds up with a lot of other things in addition to the somewhat lesser degree of characterization for the individual characters you have in this game compared to Genshin Impact. Another thing that I don't really like, I wouldn't say, I think don't like is, I don't really like is probably a too severe of a description, but another thing that really not puts me off, that's also kind of negative. I'm trying to put this in a way that will not piss off as many people as possible, but another thing that I feel is a tiny bit inferior to Genshin Impact is the character voice lines, right? This just adds on to the lesser degree of characterization for each individual character, and overall just the production value of the characters. They have only one idle animation that only plays in civilian areas. Their voice lines are also much fewer than in Genshin Impact. So these are the voice lines for a 5-star character called Bailu. These are all the voice lines that they have, whereas in Genshin Impact, you go to their voice lines, right? You go to their story, you go to their, not this, you go to their voiceover, and they have an entire, like, a whole long ass list of voice lines that I have never even seen or interacted with, but they're there. And I feel like this makes the characters, you know, if you really want to simp for these characters and get to know them, they're there for you. And I don't think that is there to the same degree in Honkai Star Rail, unfortunately. Even the stories, there's only four stories, 4 story blurbs. They're all pretty short, whereas for Genshin Impact characters, the stories are long as fuck. And they have 5 of them, including another one for, I don't know what this is, and another vision one. So in total, they have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 story blurbs, in comparison to only 4 for Honkai Star Rail, unfortunately. So the lack of voice lines doesn't just extend to the simping part. I also find that the ultimate animations that constantly play for these characters also only have one voice line, and this gets really old very, very fast. In Genshin Impact, I don't even remember a single voice line that I can just repeat over and over and over again. But with Honkai Star Rail, I don't even have Sela. I don't even play this game in English, but I know her voice lines. I'm already sick of her voice lines just from watching streams of Honkai Star Rail. It's something like, break the chains to pass, and something about butterflies, drown a sea of butterflies, illusions of the past, I'll destroy you, or something, some bullshit. It's super annoying. And I've read on Twitter that there are 2 voice lines, a shortened voice line for the double speed and then a longer voice line for the normal speed. But from what I've tested, especially for Danhen, it's like it's the exact same shit. There's really only one voice line, and then they just shorten it for the double speed. On the normal speed, it's still the same voice line. They literally have one voice line for the ultimate, and then they have another voice line for when they're selected, when it's their turn. And that's essentially all the voices that they get in terms of combat. And I don't know. I feel like this needs to change if we're going to keep playing this game for over a long period of time, because at some point you're going to have players just shut off the voice audio entirely and play this game on autoplay. And that's really disappointing. Anyways, that's pretty much all I have to say in terms of the negatives for this game. Really, if you consider the overall scope of Honkai Star Rail, it really says something that the biggest negatives I have for the game is the character selection screen, the lack of voiceovers for certain parts of the combat, and maybe just a little bit less characterization for the characters. For a lot of players, this is essentially meaningless. It's not a factor in their enjoyment of the game because they don't interact with the lore at all. They don't really care about the story. You know, maybe if they've played Genshin Impact, it probably feels a bit worse to have just a JPEG for the weapon that does not show up on the 3D model. But I also think these JPEGs, these light cones essentially, which are the weapons in this game, do have their own personality. I do like the fact that they are like a really cute picture. They do tell you something about the characters in this game. You know, you have Asta over here, you have Arlen over here. They're both playable characters, and then you have their doggy out in outer space. The pictures do tell a story. However, they are not on the same level of production value as a weapon in Genshin. With a weapon in Genshin, you have special effects that sometimes show up around it. They show up on the character itself when they're in combat, and they have a unique pose for it in the weapon submenu. So to offset this, if you go to Warp, right, and you go to the event banner weapon banner, and you view the details, they don't work the same as weapons in Genshin Impact. They actually have a 5-star drop rate of 75%, the up drop rate, and then for 4 stars, it's also 75%. And the hard pity is not 90 pulls, but 80 pulls. So in my opinion, Honkai Star Rail and Hoyoverse absolutely understand that they are not on the same level. These light weapons are not important enough to the same level as Genshin Impact weapons. That's why they drop the drop rate. That's why they up the drop rate. So that we are incentivized more to pull for them, even though they are essentially just JPEGs. Like in many other gacha games, it's not to the same level of production value in any way whatsoever, unfortunately. Another thing that is different about light cones is that they don't really have their own internal story. What I mean by this is that you press this, right, and then there's like a little lore blurb right here, but there's no other story. In Genshin Impact, right, you select the weapon, you go over here, you select the weapon, you go to details, and then there's a description that is essentially its own entire short story. In Honkai Star Rail, this doesn't exist. You go to database, right? You go to databank, you press the light cones, you go to this light cone that I have collected, and there's no tab, there's no button for the story. This little blurb right here is the entire story for the light cone. So there is also a bit less writing involved in the characterization of these light cones. I guess you could tell the story just by looking at it itself. So I think that's it in terms of the negatives. I'm trying to think of, is there really anything else? I've written a guideline, right? So this is what I consider to be the negatives. The character selection screen is bad. There's less poses. You don't really get to see them holding their weapons. Oh, I forgot. Yeah, that reminds me. The fact that you don't really get to see their weapons can be a major negative depending on what character you're trying to look at. For example, Clara. Clara is not actually the character you're playing as. The character that is doing all the attacks is Clara's robot, Svarog. And Svarog is its own entity. It's like an entire thing outside of Clara. He just shows up to protect her. So even when you look at Clara's design, it feels a bit basic, right? You don't really expect this character to do anything. She's not the one doing the task. She's not the one. She literally just shouts, "Help me, Svarog," or "Help me, Mr. Robot," or something. I don't know what the exact voice line is, but she just yells and then Svarog does things for her. But you will never get to see Svarog in this character selection screen. Even if you do have her, there's no way to see him because, well, there's no weapon panel for you to open up that has the character holding the weapon, in this case Svarog. So an entire half of the character is just missing. And arguably the more important half, again, it's just, I don't know, it feels like a bit disappointing. In my first impression videos, I did say that I thought that this character selection screen was actually made to be this way to prevent, you know, people peeking up the panties. I said that this selection screen was simplified to prevent peeking up the panties of characters, right? Because as you notice here, you can only swivel around the character on one plane. That's another thing that's kind of bad about this character selection screen. You can't go upwards or downwards. You can't swivel any other way. There's only one set camera angle. You can zoom in to her face, but you can't zoom down or anything. And I have changed my opinion on this. I already said as much in my first day impressions video, but it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Because another improvement this game has made on Genshin Impact is that characters, playable characters, actually exist in the world itself. So you go to administrative district, right? You teleport over here, and since I've already finished the game, you can go into this area called Klepoth Fort, this instanced area where 2 playable characters will actually exist in the world without the need of quest. Here's one character, here's Pella, still in the same place as yesterday. Here's Bronya, and what you can do is, if this is what you're into, you can essentially look up their ass or the crotch area however you want, and you won't get censored to the same degree as the playable character. What you had to do in Genshin Impact was invite another playable character into your world through a friend or something, and then look up their asses. If that's what you're into, I'm not suggesting you do it, but that was the way that you could do it. In this game, that's no longer necessary. You don't need friends anymore. You can just go up to these characters that already exist in your game world, who are not censored to the same degree, and then, you know, just look at their crotch area if that's what you want. So that just tells me that, you know, it's most likely the case that they just didn't put that much effort into this character selection screen. And as for why I say that, if you go to some of the beta footage, right? If you go to some of the beta footage for the characters that you could see and you go to the character selection screen, let's just use let's use Blade as an example. Blade beta character. Honkai Star Rail. This will show you, I believe, oh my god, there's so many new stuff. Biggest one, the teams, blah 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 blah. Maybe this will show the character selection screen. No, it's not here. Okay, Blade, Honkai. Yeah. This will definitely show the character selection screen at some point. Maybe. Oh my god. It still doesn't work. Maybe this? Maybe this will show the character selection screen. Wow, this is so far to find when I want to find it. Yikes. Yeah, this is the character selection screen. As you can notice, immediately after you enter the character selection, this is the panel you get. This is the camera angle. You don't even see the full body. It's a bit different from what is in Genshin right now, right? In Genshin, you press character selection screen, you see a full body view, but in the beta, you just see a half body view, and I don't think you can even zoom out of it. I have not seen anybody do that so far. You actually get different views of the character as you press on different tabs. This is the skill tab. I think this is the traces tab, or right. This is another camera angle. You go here, you can press on it, you can press on this. And this is the Eidolon tab where you get to see another angle of the character, whereas right now you go to Eidolons and you see a different image. I believe this is superior to what we had in the beta. I didn't actually play it, but this just looks like a scuffed version of Genshin, and I think they realized that as well, which is why they changed it to this. It's not a bad thing, but I wonder why they didn't keep the Genshin format of them holding the weapon, doing a pose for the artifacts, this kind of thing, because frankly it's higher production values. So my conclusion is the reason why they have this character selection screen with the limited camera angle, the lack of poses, the weapons not being viewable on the characters themselves is just because they didn't put as much effort into it, unfortunately. And that does it for all of the negatives for this game. Let's look at this again. No idols in combat areas, less ability voice lines, already covered that. Can't switch characters in train, limited camera angles, no idols, no weapon poses, and that's it. Phew. Let's go get on with the fun stuff, the combat. I think I've already mentioned a tiny bit of this. The combat is way more fun than I expected, probably because I'm still in the honeymoon phase. But even then, I think it says something that Hoyoverse has managed to make a game's combat seem fun, be fun, and at the same time not alienate people by being too complex. It is a very simple system, but you will have more nuanced gameplay with status effects, with different abilities that let you not or have enemies that control your character or do ailments to your character, and then you will have to prioritize a lot of things. I think the way that the skill points work, the way you can interrupt enemy actions with your ultimate, there is more complexity here than meets the eye. There is more nuance than assumed. Some skills do have variations. For example, when you go to the destruction version of Stella here, the main character, you can see that let's go to skills, right? Basic attack, that's one attack. There's the skill where you can attack the blast, right? Deal physical damage equal to 93% of Trailblazer attack to a single enemy and enemies adjacent to it. That's one version. And then the ultimate has actually two versions. You can choose an AoE version or a single target version. So oftentimes characters will actually have upgraded versions of their ultimate or AoE or single target versions of their ultimate or the skill. And that does add more variation to the skill and abilities than just every single one having only three, a normal attack, a skill, and an ultimate. There are character combos that you can do. There are character positioning that also matters. For example, you press T, you go to character. Okay, this is another improvement over Genshin Impact. In Genshin Impact, when you want to change characters, right, you have to press L or whatever is the equivalent on your phone, and then it takes like 2 or 3 seconds for the characters to load so you can change them. In Honkai Star Rail, it's instant. You just press this button here, you press T, or again, whatever is the equivalent on your phone or PS5 when it comes out, and then it goes immediately into character selection and changes. Here you have 6 tabs. I don't know if you can add any more, actually. Can you add more? This seems to be a... Actually, I just discovered another limitation. You only have 6 party loadouts, whereas in Genshin you have 10. Right? So this is what it's like when you want to change your party loadout. In Genshin, you have 10 loadouts. But in Honkai Star Rail, apparently as of this moment, you only have 6. But it is instant when you want to load into it. And when you change, what you see here is how the characters are positioned when you go into combat. What you will want to do is to have the character that is getting attacked, the one that is taking aggro, on the sides, so that when there are AoE attacks, they'd only hit one other character rather than 2 other characters. That's just a tiny bit more nuance in how the game plays that I did not consider when I first started it. I already covered interrupting enemies with ult, character positioning. The combat is just good. I'm currently on the curve. It feels like the same curve that I was on with Genshin Impact, where I discovered the combat, the elemental reactions. It seemed so fun, and then it went up and up and up as I got more characters. I discovered more character combos, and eventually it will go down as I hit a plateau, as it gets much harder to farm for talents and all that sort of stuff, and that I just stop progressing as fast, and it does become less fun overall, as you're pulling for the same characters over and over again, and you get dupes over Constellation 6, which in this game is called Idolins, right? They're called islands, but they're essentially the same thing. The islands themselves don't seem to be as powerful as in Genshin. I do think they've learned a bit here, where because the characters have less production value to them, and because they're probably more necessary in this game as you face different types of enemy weaknesses that you have to counter. So it would suck a lot if characters in this game were just completely power locked by their constellations. And that's not what I see here. The constellations for the main character is is just whatever. And it seems like that's also the same thing for Bailu, who is a legit 5-star standard character. Their constellations are good, but they're not like mind breaking. They don't change how you play the character. Unlike Faruzan, which is a 4-star character in Genshin Impact, who is completely locked out of her ability to do pretty much anything until Constellation 6. So, good on Hoyoverse. They recognize the quality of the game, they recognize what they needed to do to make this game more friendly towards players, perhaps as a result of this game being turn-based and as a result, more niche. But whatever it is, I think it's working. As for the Belobog story, I'm split on it. The Belobog story, I've heard a lot of people describe as very good. They put it on the same level as Sumeru. I was watching the Crit's stream one day, and then he said that Belobog's story is actually better than Sumeru's. And I've also heard other streamers like MTash say that they enjoy this game's story more than Hoyo than Genshin Impact. But I will say I did not have the same experience. I do think it is better than Mondstadt, but all of the story beats seem to be hitting the same usual Hoyoverse storytelling structure structure arcs that exist in Genshin. I honestly think if I were to put this Belobog story on a ranking list with Genshin Impact stories, I would put it maybe just below Sumeru. That is where I would put it. When I fought the last boss of Belobog, I thought it was as if they put Scaramouche's boss into Mondstadt, and that was the last boss. And the story structure as well is very similar to Sumeru, where you go into a new region, and then there is a mystery that keeps what's it called? It keeps falling upwards towards the climax. It keeps on rising. There is a rising tension going on, where everything you learn about the world makes it seem more deadly and makes it seem worse. And eventually you find out what is going on, what is wrong with the world, and then you fix it. You fight the final boss, just like you fought Scaramouche, and that was it. It was not groundbreaking. The reason why I feel like a lot of people like this game's story more than Genshin is frankly because there's no Paimon. There is something like Paimon in March 7th, but March 7th is nowhere near as annoying, which might be controversial. Probably not, but I do find March 7th to be not as... Because March 7th is not speaking for your character, right? Your character has their own dialogue options, and sometimes, a lot of the times, they are unhinged. And completely in opposition to March 7th's dialogue, whereas Paimon is essentially speaking for your character. Your character only speaks once in a blue moon when there is a cutscene, or just following a cutscene. As for the overall story dialogue, a lot of it is meta dialogue humor, which is a departure from Genshin Impact. You will see a lot of references to other media types and other franchises, which I don't think is necessarily a good or bad thing. I'm not really into that kind of stuff, so for people who do like it, I can see this being superior to Genshin Impact, but for me, it can be a bit too meta at times. There was this one quest where I was going into like a food stand and I was having a crab eating contest, and one of the dialogue lines, like 4 lines down the dialogue tree, was them literally just saying, "Are you bored of the dialogue yet? Is this too long? Do you need to stop?" And that just took me out of the game. It didn't feel good. It just felt like they weren't mocking me, but they were too self-aware. I felt like it was not conducive to making me immersed in the game. At the end of the game, okay, here is a bit of spoiler, so if you don't want to hear this part, then bye-bye. But when you defeated the last bog of Belobog, I didn't like how you didn't see the Stellaron. Like, the Stellaron just kind of exploded, and it took Cocolia with her. But then afterwards, you got an epilogue dialogue with Welt and with Himiko, similar to how you got an epilogue dialogue with Nahida, explaining what exactly happened, and they contained it. But you never see that in action, and I don't really understand how Himiko and Welt got onto the planet while everything was going on. But because wouldn't that leave the train unguarded and then dealt with the Stellaron? I was also kind of confused about what the architects and preservation were. I don't really understand how our main character was able to convene or, like, I don't know, sync with preservation and get their powers. It just seemed kind of come out of nowhere. In fact, I don't really understand how the powers in this game work at all, because as you can see, they have their own they have their own elemental system. There's physical, fire, ice, lightning, wind, quantum, imaginary. But but why do they have these powers? Why is it that Sela can disappear into a sea of butterflies and then like literally yeet all of the enemies with her fucking illusion shits? It doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't. Why does she have? Why does Serval have electric powers? Why does Asta have pyro powers? Why does Bailu have electric powers? Why does Danhun have wind powers? The elemental system in this game that has not revealed itself from a lore standpoint. It just feels kind of there. In fact, it feels like they're secondary. They're secondary to the paths, which are the different classes of this game. For example, the hunt is single target. Destruction is AOE. Sort of like a cross between an AoE and a tank. Erudition is pure AoE, Harmony is buffs, Nihility is debuffs, Preservation is defense, Abundance is heals. And I feel like this actually matters more. These classes actually matter more than the elemental types. The elemental types are just there so that you can do extra damage to enemies with those elemental type weaknesses. And even the classes don't really make sense because, like, one of the main characters, right? Oh my god, it's the next day. One of the main characters is a what's it called? Oh my god, I'm having a brain fart. One of the main characters, Bronia, is this region's leader, and the leader is supposed to worship Klapoth, who is a preservation god, and her path is harmony, I believe. So how does that work? Shouldn't everybody that is part of the architects or this faction, this Belobog faction, be worshipping Klapoth? So how does that work? I don't know. Maybe I'll figure out later on. I have read pretty much all of the terms. Like, I'm not completely clueless. I've gone into the data bank. I've read the blurbs for all of the Aeons. I've read all of the blurbs for the, what's it called? For the enemy characters, for the terms, for the factions. I've read all of this stuff, and I still don't understand how elemental powers and the paths are supposed to work when it comes to consistency with their powers. So that's another part I don't really understand about the story. Wow, this music is a bit loud. Okay, let's go over here. It may sound like I'm being too negative about this game, but I'm just pointing out the things that I don't understand. It's not necessarily a negative or a positive. Here is legitimately one of the things that makes me feel the weirdest about playing this game, which is the community surrounding it and how people are afraid to compare this game to Genshin Impact. I know there's going to be one weirdo out there, one or two weirdos out there who are saying things like, why are you comparing this to Genshin Impact? They're two different games. But it's just copium. It's just, you're saying that because you don't want to upset people. Streamers are saying that because they're saying that they don't enjoy. They're not saying that Genshin Impact is a worse game than Honkai Star Rail, or that Honkai Star Rail is a better game than Genshin Impact, because they don't want to make the effort to explain themselves, especially to a bunch of fucking weirdos who will pretty much lambast them for anything that is remotely negative. And honestly, that has impacted my ability to enjoy this game more than the game itself. I don't think, and it's not, there are reasons for why this is. And I think one of the main reasons is that no matter how much we criticize either of these games, Hoyoverse is probably not going to import any of the things that are improvements in either game to the game itself. I don't really expect them to improve the character selection screen in Honkai Star Rail. I think it's a done deal at this point. They're not going to give us more poses. They're not going to have a panel for Clara for us to see Sverog, because that's just not how Hoyoverse does things. They don't really port things from one game to another once they're finished. Honkai Impact 3rd had the ability to shut off constellations for a long time now, and that is still not in Genshin Impact. So why would they import things from Honkai Star Rail over to Genshin, and from Genshin to Honkai Star Rail? There's no indication that is going to happen, which ultimately makes all of these complaints about either games seem kind of moot. There's also the fact that some people just don't like turn-based games, or they don't gel with the story of Honkai Star Rail. So no matter how much you praise this game, there's always going to be a certain section of Genshin players who will not like it, and that just plays into how streamers usually don't want to upset that portion of fan base, so they don't really talk about it at all. They either just say that it's incomparable, or that they're two completely different games, and make some milk toast comment about how Genshin Impact, I don't know, they just don't cover it. I have seen the opposite, not the opposite, but another version of this where they won't say Genshin Impact is bad. They'll just say that they are burnt out on Genshin and that they are not excited about it, and they are excited about Honkai Star Rail. But that kind of statement also makes me feel a bit weird. It also feels like another version of the milk toast incomparable comparison option, because it should be obvious that if you play a game like Genshin Impact for over 2.5 years, you're going to get burnt out on it, right? So it kind of confused me why they were saying this. It's either interaction bait, or it's just I can't believe that they are this clueless. It should be obvious that if you play a game for so long, you're going to be more excited about another game, especially a game that is structured in the same way but with additional new content, which Honkai Star Rail is. So that's basically all I have to say about the community side of things, especially the content creator side of things. It just seems like a natural progression of what Hoyoverse is doing. They're going to make a new game every 2 years. In 2 years, we're probably going to have Zenless Zone Zero. In another couple of weeks, I think people will get bored of this game and then go back to Genshin. And then when that game has no content, they'll go back to Honkai Star Rail. That is exactly what I am planning to do. There's no drama to it. It's literally just playing the game. Have I mentioned this before? Yeah, I've already mentioned playable characters in the open world, companion quest. Characters can go into your main hub now. Characters will visit your train. Oh yeah, dailies. The dailies in this game are much easier to do than in Genshin Impact. Genshin Impact, you actually have to go do your dailies in the open world. You have to head off to them. In this game, well, you basically just do whatever you were going to do anyways. The dailies in this game are actually more similar to the battle pass in Genshin than they are to the dailies in Genshin. In the dailies in Genshin, you have to do very specific things. You have to go and you have to go to certain points on the map, right? And then there are purple points on the map that you go to. Then you just do the quests. But in Honkai Star Rail, like let me show you. So this is a daily. These are the dailies in Honkai Star Rail. Use technique 2 times. It's literally just playing the game. Do any battle and you'll be able to use the technique 2 times. Synthesize material 1 time. So basically, just use a crafting system. Clear stagnant shadow. That's like a domain. Complete 1 daily mission. This is the only thing that is similar to Genshin Impact. It's a daily mission similar to how you have daily missions, or I don't know what it's called anymore in Genshin Impact, but this is the only thing similar to Genshin. Everything else is essentially just playing the game as you were going to play the game anyways, which is what the Genshin Impact Battle Pass is like. So that's an improvement to make the game actually more casual than Genshin. There's also more endgame combat in this game. Like here is the equivalent of Spiral Abyss, right? This is the Spiral Abyss of Genshin Impact. That's one form of endgame, and I believe once you reach the very end, this will reset, and then you'll get the actual version of it, similar to how you have floors 9 to 12 in Genshin. And then there's also another form of endgame called, what's it called? Called Simulated Universe, which is a more developed version of the roguelike system that we have in the Spiral Abyss. It's like an offshoot of that, or if you play Honkai Impact 3rd, it's called Elysium Realm. I have personally not played it, but from what I've heard, that is a further development or an alternate version of that. So they're obviously taking inspiration from games that are not Genshin as well. The party selection is fast, guaranteed 5-star 300 pulls. Here's another good thing about this game. When you go to Warp, which is the pulse for this game, go to the standard banner. After you pull on the standard banner for 300 times, you will get a guaranteed character of your choosing for the 5-star, right? So I really want Welt. So eventually I will be able to get Welt as I pull on this banner for 300 times, which I suspect will take 1 to 2 years. I don't know what the rate is, but this is an improvement for players who, you know, just want to collect characters. But I don't I'm torn about this because I feel like characters are more crucial in this game, because when you want to make a team for it, right? There are certain characters just work better against certain elements. It's kind of like that as well in Genshin Impact, but I feel like Genshin Impact is a bit more lenient. With Honkai Star Rail, there are just enemies that you will not be able to do as much damage against if you don't have the right elements. So obviously you are going to want to collect elements that go specifically against that enemy. I don't think this game is as lenient in terms of what you can do in combat. As I said in my first day impressions, there's a bit more deliberateness to this game than Genshin. So yeah, you get a guaranteed character at 300 pulls, but then again, as like I said in the past, these characters have less production value attached to them in terms of their characterization. At the same time, they're also more necessary than before. There's currently only 2 healers in the game. There's a 5-star called Bailu, another 4-star called Natasha, and you basically need at least one of them if you even want to clear. You basically need, actually, you might even need both of them if you want to clear the Spiral Abyss from what I've seen. So, like, what are the chances of that? That's literally impossible for most free-to-play players. HSR is worse. I've covered that. Ambiguous performance, I've already mentioned that. It's more GPU intensive. The resolution quality has less options. Assignments are redundant. So, in Honkai Star, they've also simplified the assignments, which are the commissions in Genshin Impact. In Genshin Impact, you have to go up to Catherine to do the commissions, right? The commissions are basically just a mindless time waster where you click some buttons and then you get rewards in a certain number of hours. It's the same thing in Honkai Star Rail, but they've gone one step farther to make it easier. You can now dispatch them from your menu instead of going up to Catherine. And then when they're done, you can redispatch them all at the same time. You don't have to click on each character individually like in Genshin. So that is, technically speaking, an improvement. My problem with it, though, is that I think it's just kind of redundant. Like, what is this? In Genshin Impact, right? Let's go head over to Genshin Impact. In Genshin Impact, you go to... Wow, it's an SDA. You go up to Catherine, and the way the commissions are presented to you feel a bit more consistent than in Honkai Star Rail. Here you see a map of the region that you can send commissions on, right? Expeditions on. Here's another map of Liyue. Here is Inazuma. Here is a map of Sumeru. It feels like it's immersive. Whereas in Honkai Star Rail, it's literally just a text. It's a text menu. And I can read it. It does explain some things to me, but let's be honest, the way it's presented here does not feel immersive. It feels like a holdover from Genshin Impact, where they had to include the system because it's part of every single gacha system where you just mindlessly press buttons to fill up a queue for more resources. Like, what does this add to the game anymore? You don't really have to go up to an in-game character to do it. You are not even reminded of this unless you are doing your dailies. There's no connection between the assignments and any in-game element, in-game world element. So I don't think this is an improvement. It's just making something that was already a mindless task even more mindless. So I put that in ambiguous. Difficulty, I don't think I've mentioned this yet, but Genshin Impact characters, it's very clear what the difference is between 4-star and 5-star characters. Yes, there are 4-star characters that are better than 5-star characters, but 5-star characters have unique ultimate or burst animations, whereas 4-star characters do not have that cutscene happen. But in Honkai Star Rail, the difference between them is not as obvious. All of the characters, whether 4-star characters or 5-star characters, have cutscenes for their ultimate animations. And as far as I know, the 4-stars are also able to clear the Spiral Abyss, and a lot of them are very, very good. Maybe that will change in the future. Maybe people will discover that 5-star characters have better scaling, or that they are only capable of doing this. Only certain portions of the content are only capable if you use 5-star characters. But as far as I can tell, that has not happened yet. So what exactly is the difference between a 4-star and 5-star in Honkai Star Rail? It's literally just the pull rate. From a design perspective, like, this is a 5-star character, but I don't feel like they're more well designed than a 4-star character. They don't have more voice lines. They don't have more idle animations. All of them have only one idle animation. They don't have more voice lines for their ultimate. Their ultimate has a cutscene just like all the other 4-star characters. So is it really only just power level? And even now, even then, power level is not as clear as in Genshin Impact. In Genshin Impact, DPS characters that are 5 stars are just better than 4-star DPS characters. So maybe that will change as the game keeps developing. Character mod side bosses still harder. Another thing that I'm kind of iffy about for Honkai Star Rail is that it feels like the bosses in this game, the main story quest, is just as easy as Genshin Impact. It's still not at the same level of triviality, because I have not beaten the Spiral Abyss in Honkai Star Rail, whereas I have already done that for more than a year in Genshin. So even when you're facing the boss, when you're facing a major boss in Genshin Impact, it's like, it's nothing. You put up a John Lee shield and they can't even hurt you. In this game, I still had to like do some stuff when I was facing off against Cocolia, the last boss in Belobog. But even then, it was already clear that the side bosses in that region were harder than the final boss. And they do that in both games because they want the player to be able to clear the content without having to stress out about it. And it just feels really similar to Genshin. The structure of the story, the structure of the content, the difficulty makes me quite concerned that eventually I will reach the point that I have now in Genshin, where I don't really even pay attention. I don't really pay attention to the story combat content anymore, because it's nonsense. It's too easy. And even then, the side bosses will eventually become too easy as well, as I skill harder and harder against the Spiral Abyss, which is probably going to be harder than any story content in the game. So that is something that I'm also a bit concerned about, but we'll have to see in the future. Character models can be more diverse. Because this game is a turn-based game, I do have more expectations for the character models. They don't have to agree. They don't have to be limited to the same confines of an open world environment like in Genshin Impact. They don't all have to be able to climb the same wall. They don't all have to have the same climbing animations and the same 4, 5, 6 character models that exist in Genshin. For example, I have noticed that character models in this game, like women, are able to have more height differences than in Genshin Impact. This character is a bit taller than Asta, but the range of height is greater than in Genshin Impact from what I've noticed already. Here are 2 characters that are roughly the same height. Here's another character that is shorter. Here's a character that is shorter as well. So essentially, these would be like 3 different sets of character models in Genshin Impact. But here is just like, well, you can do this. There is also more weird characters like Clara that have a giant robot do their attacks for them. In Genshin Impact, this would not be easy. In Genshin Impact, Svarog would essentially be a cutscene animation for the ultimate, and that's that. Whereas in this game, they're all cutscene animations, so anything's possible. And not this character, but I know another character called Su Shang. She summons a giant chicken to do her combat for her in her ultimate animation. Again, that would be quite a bit harder in Genshin Impact, because it would either have to be a cutscene or it would have to be a summon, and a summon would probably be impossible given the degree of production value they put into Genshin right now. So another positive on Honkai Star Rail side, at least in theory, we will have to see whether or not they stick to the very basic same generic character models they do in Genshin Impact in Honkai. But if they do stray away from that, I would be very happy. Overall, I think Honkai Star Rail right now is very similar to Genshin Impact in terms of, oh, there's Arlen. Again, as I talked about the companion quest. Let these characters just randomly enter your train. I don't know how they do it. If they're able to just teleport from their their planet or space station onto the train, doesn't that make the train redundant because there's a teleportation device? Anyways, the feeling I have for Honkai Star Rail right now is that I am playing the same. I'm receiving the same amount of feelings that I was getting when I first started Genshin Impact. I'm still on that upward trajectory of discovering the game, discovering more characters. I have not maxed out all the Adolins for the characters yet, so it doesn't feel as bad when I'm pulling. Every pull feels like I'm getting something new, even if I'm not getting a 5-star. There's more dopamine coming in. I'm getting more serotonin connecting my brain cells. I don't know if that actually makes any sense. I actually don't know how serotonin works, but you get what I mean. It feels good to play this game, but it doesn't feel good in a different way from when I first started playing Genshin Impact, which is why I'm ultimately very skeptical of the idea that this game is doing anything that is significantly better than Genshin, whether it's the story, whether it's the meta dialogue. Yes, there are some quality of life adjustments, but this game essentially plays to the same tune as Genshin, which is why I'm concerned that eventually I will clear the Spiral Abyss and the alternate version of the Spiral Abyss, which is Simulated Universe. They are improvements on Genshin's endgame, but will that be enough for hardcore players? I don't know. Anyways, that's all I have to say for Honkai Star Rail for now. This is Bench Gamer signing out. I hope you all enjoy a good whatever evening, morning, wherever you are. Bye bye.